Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Best Damn Pod in the Land. I am your host and sports director, Brian Nelson, and with me I have...
the one, the only, your assistant sports editor. Not wearing any creative attire today, so I don't have to bring it up, Andy Anders.
And I'm your sports editor, Griffin Strom.
And Khalid could not make it here today. He had a prior engagement, but we still have all three of us, which should be enough to recap the Wisconsin game and everything that's been happening since. Let's just dive right into everything. Ohio State dominated Wisconsin, won 38-7. Andy, what was your takeaway?
Well, 38-7. That game. Well, pardon my hesitation here. I'm just trying to collect my thoughts on this game here, but I think Ohio State really showed why they are looking like the most complete team in the country, right? It was complete domination of really Wisconsin's offense, especially the only time Wisconsin was able to score Saturday. They got the ball at Ohio State's 30-yard line, shut down who a lot of people considered to be the best running back in the country, Jonathan Taylor, 52 yards on 20 carries, really imposed their will against what's traditionally a really good Wisconsin offensive line, especially with Chase Young, who we'll talk more about in a second. And then the running game got established once the Buckeyes figured out how their footing in the bad weather really took over in the second and third quarter. So overall, really strong showing from Ohio State Saturday. Mm-hmm.
But it didn't start that way, Andy. In fact, in the first half, it really looked like it might be a competitive game front to back. It was a 10-0 lead going into halftime for Ohio State. And in the first half, that weather, despite Ryan Day saying that it wouldn't affect the play calling, it clearly had a huge effect on the team. You saw Justin Fields bobble a snap that's kind of uncharacteristic of him. You also saw no pass attempts until the last 30 seconds of the first quarter, and just 2 in that quarter overall. The running game couldn't get going either. They were kind of just punting the ball back and forth to each other there, Wisconsin and Ohio State. And it was really a defensive struggle early. And even after they came out after halftime, Wisconsin scored to make it a 3-point game. And from that point, we're all thinking that this might be the game that it was billed as a couple weeks ago, even before the Wisconsin's loss to Illinois. But it did not end up that way.
It did not at all. Ohio State really came alive in the second half, especially, and particularly that was thanks to the performances of our Ohio State's number 2s. J.K. Dobbins and Chase Young really shined. Let's talk about Chase Young for a second. He had a monster game. 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, just incredible performance. He's vaulted himself into the Heisman Trophy consideration. Andy, what is your take
on Chase Young? Really, the blend of different things that he showed us he can do Saturday was what stood out to me the most. In pass rush, he was able to beat guys with a quick first step coming around the end. He was able to beat guys by overpowering them and knocking them off balance. He was able to beat guys just in a variety of different ways. And the ability of him on pass rush to read an offensive lineman and then counter what that person is trying to do to him it makes him nearly impossible to block in those situations one-on-one. It was interesting to see the number of times Wisconsin gave him one-on-one matchups in this game, and he just annihilated the defense. We also saw him defend a screen very nicely, provide some really good run support, just doing everything, and he's vaulted himself into warranted Heisman discussion.
Yeah, and he's kind of recapping some of the talking points that he and I discussed in our episode of the Film Room yesterday. Please go check that out if you haven't. Some great discussion going on there. But Andy is right. You know, Chase Young really just he himself has said that he feels like he's unblockable, and I feel like Wisconsin was almost just like, letting him have their way with him. Just like they're just like, we can't block him. We'll put a tight end on him and just pray for the best and just hope we can maybe move the ball away, and it just didn't work at all. Wisconsin's offensive line is usually very strong, and even then they still were pretty strong and handled Ohio State's defense for a good portion of the game, but it just wasn't enough.
Yeah, and everyone talks about a Heisman moment in a season. You think back to Cam Newton's run against LSU, that bludgeoning type of run he had, scrambling for extra yardage, and things of that nature. And for Chase Young, you could look at this game as being one of those Heisman-type moments where you just completely dominate the game. I mean, he was making plays early. He was making plays late. It was a front-to-back performance from him. But I just think for a defensive player, when you're talking about the Heisman, he might have to have like 2 or 3 of those Heisman moment-type games that you look back on as being a totally dominant performance for him to really vault himself at the top of that discussion.
Well, he has that stage, Penn State coming up, Michigan coming up. I think when we talk about Chase Young specifically as it relates to the Heisman, here's the thing about the Heisman, right? The Heisman, in my eyes, a lot of the time, this is kind of my take with the Heisman, it's not necessarily about being the best or most dominant player in the country. It's who the media gives the most coverage as being the best player in the country. It's what happened in years past with Tua and Kyler, all these different things. The media really hypes up a candidate, and whoever gets the most media exposure is the one who typically wins the Heisman Award. I think that Chase Young is actually starting to get some of that exposure. Big national analysts are talking about him, and it's given him a legitimate shot at this title because he did it on a stage like he did against Wisconsin.
Absolutely. Shout out to Joe Clapp, by the way. He's been a huge champion of Chase Young, really. But it's tough. And not only that, I agree with you, Andy, that the media definitely plays a huge role in who wins the Heisman. But at the same time, it's also primarily an offensive-based award and primarily a quarterback award. You look at who's been winning it recently and just in the past, defensive players rarely win the Heisman.
Because the quarterbacks get all the media hype.
Quarterbacks get all the media hype. And if it's not quarterback, it's likely going to be a running back just because they're going to put up big numbers offensively. You look back to the last 2 times a defensive player really had contention for the Heisman with Manti Te'o, and he got second and lost to Johnny Manziel, which was a deserved win for Manziel. Manziel had a great year, but Te'o definitely was very strong, defensively. And then you look back to 2009 when Ndamukong Suh arguably should have won the Heisman Trophy and was quite possibly one of the most dominant defenders college football has ever seen. And Mark Ingram won the award. And Mark Ingram had a very good year, but was it better than Suh's? Debatable.
This seems to be playing into Brian's pro-Nebraska bias a little bit.
I mean, it does help the fact that I brought up 2 Notre Dame and Nebraska players, and I am definitely biased towards those 2 teams. But I would be saying...
Who likes Notre Dame?
My mom, a lot. But I would be saying this regardless of which team they were on, just because I mean, those were just different years for the Heisman, just like player statistics. But, I think if... you have a defender who's the best player in the country clearly and is putting up monster numbers, then you should reward them instead of just going with who is the best media-wise.
On the one thing with Suh is that he played for a Nebraska team that wasn't really that relevant nationally in the end.
No.
They got to the Big 12 title game. So usually you think best player, they have to be on one of the best teams. Yeah. And I think that should be the case. So I don't think Suh, when you talk about Ingram put up some impressive numbers that year in Alabama, won the national title, if I'm not mistaken.
They did, yes. So, they beat Texas. I think the last time we've seen someone win the Heisman Trophy and not be on like a nationally relevant team was when Lamar Jackson won at Louisville.
Right. And then probably Tebow before him because Florida was in a down year the year he won it.
Yeah, you could also argue Manziel, A&M, but I think A&M was only like a 3-loss team that year, and they still beat Alabama, if I'm not mistaken, so I'd say they're still nationally relevant.
Right. But on from the Heisman conversation, overall the defense really shut down Jonathan Taylor in this game, and then Cone wasn't able to weather the bad weather the same way the Ohio State offense was. Griffin, your thoughts?
On Jonathan Taylor?
On the defense shutting down.
Yes.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote an article praising Jonathan Taylor. One of our editors that knows a little less about sports even told me that she read the article and she said, I'm scared because for what Jonathan Taylor might do to this defense, considering all of his laundry list of accolades he's had. I mean, he led the nation in rushing yards last season. He was the Doak Walker Award winner, and people were really thinking, especially when you look back to, and I know the defense is playing very differently, but you look back to last season with some of the performances that running backs had on Ohio State. You look at Anthony McFarland from Maryland, and I was thinking, man, could we see like a 200-yard game possibly out of Jonathan Taylor? And I know, like I said, the defense has been completely different, but I just thought this caliber of offensive line, this caliber of back, might he break free and do damage to this defense like we haven't seen it done yet this season? And the answer was a resounding no. I mean, he was really a non-factor in the entire game. You saw him get wrapped up for tackles for loss, and I think some of those plays were more likely to end up on somebody's highlight reel than any of his runs in the game. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Taylor was held to 52 yards and 20 carries, which was like an average of 2.6 yards per carry.
Yep,
which was the worst of his career.
Yeah, it was his lowest yardage of the season. His previous worst game of his career came against Ohio State in that Big Ten championship game in 2017, and that was his previous lowest yards per carry. I think it was something in the same ballpark.
2.7.
Yeah.
So it was just marginally worse, but still shows that historically Taylor just doesn't match well against Ohio State. They know how to contain him.
Very few poor games, if any, really, other than the two against Ohio State in his entire career, and in those games he was just completely neutralized.
Yeah, they came out with a 4-4 scheme, which a formation on defense that we haven't seen them run a whole lot this season, if ever. Putting 4 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers in the box, really taking away a lot of the horizontal stretch that Wisconsin could provide. With the jet sweeps and with some of the powers and counters that they do with Taylor. And then Ohio State's always been good when you try to run straight at them. Saw it with Michigan last year, saw it with Wisconsin in the past. Whenever you try to run straight at the Ohio State defense, they just have too many big, strong defenders on the inside. This year it's Devon Hamilton, Robert Landers, Deshaun Cornell, the middle linebackers, Tuff Borland, Baron Browning, Malik Harrison, good.
Pete Werner,
Yeah, all that strength on the inside is overwhelming. So you try and stretch them out horizontally to reopen it, and the 4-4 took that away. You saw Hilliard make a tackle for loss, 6 yards on the one time they tried to run Taylor to the edge, and
it was a really nice play from Hilliard, and it was very nice to see Hilliard, finally get kind of his time to shine. He was like a former 5-star recruit, and his entire college career has just been hindered by a ton of injuries. I think he tore an ACL, and he's just been out for like 2 seasons at this point. So seeing him come back and just get that one moment to shine, and actually and not just on special teams but like on the actual defense, was really nice to see. And we've been mentioning like all these players who had really nice games. You talked about Devon Hamilton. Devon Hamilton had a very nice game. Chase Young was definitely the star, but Devon Hamilton still had 3 tackles. He had a sack also, and he was really finding ways to penetrate and really blow up this Wisconsin offensive line and to limit Taylor.
His strength at the point of the attack, too. He does a lot of things that aren't going to show up on his stat sheet, right?
Exactly.
Eating blocks, allowing the linebackers to flow downhill, taking attention away from other defensive linemen when, you have someone that big and strong with that one technique that, eats a couple blocks. And Landers does the same thing, just in a different way with his quickness and first step. Really, the interior defensive line did so many things that don't show up in the stat book that allow the other people to get those stats. And then overall, the Ohio State defense only had to make 55 tackles in Saturday's game.
Mm-hmm.
They played so well that they weren't on the field that much.
Yeah.
And forced a good number of incompletions from Cone, I think.
That
contributed to that.
Cone was 10 for 17, 108 yards and 1 touchdown.
Right, for a guy that was throwing 77%.
Yep.
Yeah. So
entering this game. Part of that's the weather, of course, but a lot of it's he just did not have time, and when he did get time, well covered, didn't complete many downfield throws except for that one touchdown dime he threw. Even that was into tight coverage. It was just a great throw, a great catch. Mm-hmm. So, no, just all around really, really impressive performance by the Ohio State defense, and in a game where we definitely thought, all of us said Wisconsin was going to score multiple times. I don't think any of us had them scoring 7 points.
No, I think I was the lowest just with how low we had Wisconsin scoring. I think I had 31 to 14.
Yeah.
And then the three of us actually tied with our score predictions exactly, despite having three separate scores. We were all exactly 14 points away, which is very fun.
You know what they say about great minds, Brian.
Yeah, great minds do indeed think alike. Let's shift focus to talk about the offense a little bit. We've raved about the defense enough, but J.K. Dobbins, he had himself another game, really. He's been doing it all season. But this game in particular really shined when you're looking at, coming into this game, Wisconsin was the number one defense in the country, both passing-wise and rushing-wise, and Dobbins just tore them apart.
Oh, yeah. Really just the strength and the quickness as a runner, the things we've talked about all season with him, really came to light against Wisconsin. Pouncing people off the turf. This was a great set of Wisconsin linebackers, and he made them miss tackles like it was routine for him. Yeah. And it was constant chunk runs, right? I don't think he had a run longer than 30 yards, but he ended up with 163 on 20 carries. That tells you something. Mm-hmm. And it also tells you, again, how dominant and physical the offensive line is in the running game. They had some pass protection issues we'll get to later in this one, but on the run blocking, this was a stellar run blocking performance by the offensive line and a stellar performance by J.K. Dobbins, who, entering this game, Taylor was getting some Heisman talk, and now the Ohio State defense knocked him off any consideration. He's pretty much out of the race. Dobbins is taking his place as the top running back that's getting Heisman consideration. Mm-hmm. Is he truly in the thick of things? Maybe not yet, but if you're giving the Heisman to a running back, it would go to J.K. Dobbins at this point.
It's tough for Dobbins to really break through. I think Dobbins' candidacy is almost hurt by the fact that Justin Fields is having a very good season too. They almost cancel each other out almost. They're both getting Heisman consideration, but is that going to be enough to get ahead of someone like Joe Burrow or Jalen Hurts? Don't know, or even Chase Young, but it's tough. And Master Teague still had a very nice game, too. We weren't really highlighting him necessarily, but he still had 13 carries for 76 yards, after Dobbins was pretty much pulled from the game. But it's even then, if you're back, a running back is still averaging 5 yards per carry against the number one defense in the country, or former number one defense in the country. That's pretty damn good.
You're still number two, even after this.
Yeah, you're still number two, yeah.
That is funny.
Behind Ohio State now.
Yeah, they just flip-flopped. Uh-huh. So, you were talking about the offensive line and pass protection with kind of how Justin Fields got sacked quite a bit. What was
5 times?
Yeah, what was reason for that in your mind?
Well, I mean, Wisconsin is a tremendous pass rushing team. This was the first game I saw Ohio State really whiff on blocks on the offensive line. I'd said in the past that whenever they were beat as an offensive line, which wasn't common, it was because they got confused. There was a creative stunt from the defense. Defense rolled out nod front, played horizontal, et cetera, et cetera. There were a couple plays in this game where they got beat, especially at the tackle position, coming off the edges by these vaunted Wisconsin pass rushers. They cleaned it up in the second half, and it certainly wasn't even consistent in the first half. There were plays, Fields had 6 seconds to sit in the pocket and throw the ball. I think the Olave touchdown was an example of that. If I remember correctly, he wasn't really pressured on that play. Wisconsin also very good defensive coordinator. Leonard knows what he's doing on that side of the ball, and did roll out some creative blitzes that got that kind of pressure on Fields too. So it just goes to show that the offensive line not perfect in pass protection, but overall you have to like their performance. But there's issues to clean up for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why this bye week is important that it's coming now, because you did see Fields get battered around quite a bit in the game, and he even, on that one rushing touchdown he kind of landed awkwardly on his back. Sometimes you just see guys just bounce back from that stuff, and me looking at that, I'm thinking damn, how are guys getting up that quickly from that? But Fields said after the game he did actually have to go to the tent and get checked out a little bit for that back there. And then there was just several other plays where he took hits, whether it be sacks or on scrambles, and he would get up pretty gingerly. But he stayed in the game. There was even that play when Chug had to come in backing him up because Fields got his helmet knocked off on a play. And that play kind of looked almost a little bit disastrous there for Ohio State potentially, but But regardless, I think Fields will be fine, but I don't think that this week of rest is going to hurt him necessarily in terms of being a little more fresh on the back end of the season once they come back.
Especially since after this bye week, Ohio State has 4 straight games plus a possible Big Ten championship.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 5 possible straight games, and 2 of them are guaranteed to be Penn State and Michigan, with a possible rematches against Wisconsin, the Big Ten championship, or maybe Minnesota or Iowa will be there. Either way, all teams will be definitely going after Fields as much as possible.
No doubt about that.
Yeah. If you get, that's the one, again, that's the thing we've said. The only thing that could really derail this Ohio State team, save for, they don't wake up for a game or something, is Fields getting injured, because they're deep at every other position.
Yeah.
They can take a star player going down. Chase Young getting hurt would really, it would impact the team, certainly. But you would still have a very good defensive end in his place. You'd have Tyreek Smith, Jonathan Cooper, Zach Harrison still.
Mm-hmm.
Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Jeffrey Okudah going down. He's one of the best corners in America, but you'd still have Damon Arnett, Sean Wade, Cameron Brown's actually showed some potential. Amir Reap, who actually has played more of a safety, but you'd have Seven Banks. You'd have You'd have people behind these other key players if they went down. Dobbins, Teague would replace him. Fields is the one guy where there's a huge drop off from him to chuck it off.
Mm-hmm. Not to say that chucking off is bad by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not a Heisman contender like Justin Fields, and that's just the fact of the matter.
He's not even a top. I don't even think he's top half Big Ten quarterback. No offense to him, but that's. You could lose a Heisman contender at the other positions, but you
just
can't.
Cardale Jones, he is not. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay, fair enough.
All right.
I mean, he was going to be the third string if Baldwin had stayed, and then they even brought in Hoke and projected him at the beginning to be ahead of Chugginoff, and I just think it's more so his experience in the system that's granted him that second string position. So he really could, it'd be like a 4-string quarterback.
Yeah. Really, yeah. That
no offense, Chug.
And
if you're watching,
and even like this was not going to happen if Tate Martell had stayed. Chugginoff could have been like a 4th-string guaranteed, or even a 5th string.
Right.
A 6th, 7th string, 8th string.
I almost want to ask you. Remember after the first, after Fields was announced as the starter, that Day said that this just means he'll play the first snap on the first game, and we'll see from there. I almost want to ask him, so has Fields won the starting job yet?
That does all seem so ridiculous now, reflecting back upon all those fall practices where he was just, trying to hold that in for so long and try to make it seem like, there was some great, not quite.
Yeah, I'd say Fields has won the competition decisively, if there ever was a competition to begin with.
Right. As much of anything, it was a motivational tool, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you guys, speaking about competitions, do we want to dive into one of those that took place last night that I was present to see?
Yeah, let's shift some focus. Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah.
Take it away, Griffin.
The Ohio State men's basketball team ranked preseason number 18, which is their highest preseason ranking since, I believe, 2013, 2014. So 6 seasons there. That's a pretty good stretch, of in terms of the best-looking team in quite a few years for Ohio State basketball. They squared off against Cedarville last night. Not exactly an opponent that anyone was expecting to, make it a game for them, but they actually did early. They took a lead, I believe it was 23-22, like halfway into the first half, maybe a little after that. And, the Ohio State fans at the game weren't as thrilled as they might be for some of the more, the better opponents approaching for the actual regular season. It was kind of a laid-back environment for the Buckeye contingent. But Cedarville, I'm not exactly sure quite how close Cedarville is, but there was it was like a half. I won't say a half and half, but the Cedarville crowd that was there was way louder than any of the Buckeye fans, which kind of gave it an interesting feel, especially when Cedarville was staying in the game with they were hitting threes.
Brandon Moffmer.
Yeah, one of Andy's former classmates.
Classmates. I lived next door to Cedarville's point guard when I was growing up, and I actually didn't know it until I read Griffin's game recap. I wasn't in attendance at the game last night. Griffin was left up to cover that one solo.
And Clid was at the game, and I was not. So kind of deferring to Griffin here for what you saw.
And Andy's neighbor, he had a big dunk early on in the game. I think it was their first points, actually. Ohio State started off on like a 6-0 run. Then they came back. And how do you pronounce his last name? Moffmer. He dunked, and the Cedarville faithful really came to a thunderous applause. They're definitely roaring. And but then Caleb Wesson ended up kind of taking over a little bit. He scored like 5 straight at a certain point, then kept hitting shots. He hit 3 of 4 threes, which his career high in threes for a game is 3. So he tied that, even though this isn't really counting towards a game or anything. But he only missed 2 shots in the entire game, 9 for 11. He ended up with 23. He was doing it in the low post. He was doing it from outside. He hit those 3 threes. He also hit another long jumper. He really did look nice. And we talked so much about his weight loss. But he still looks wide out there, Like even with I think he just looks a lot better because, he looks a lot leaner. But you can tell that he's not sacrificing anything in terms of strength because he still does look bigger than especially last night. Cedarville's biggest player was like 6'9". They had a couple guys that size, but he did just look bigger than everybody else in the court, even with all that lost weight. And the freshmen as well, I think was a big question mark coming in. I mean, that was the number 14 class that kind of was powering a lot of expectations for Ohio State coming into this season. And people were wanted to know, like, is DJ Carton gonna start? He did not. CJ Walker started ahead of him, but I would say DJ Carton looked better than CJ Walker in the game. Holtman was talking a lot after the game about how CJ Walker was pressing a lot. It had been almost like 2 years since he had played in an actual game, and he got his shot blocked a few times. He was really crashing to the hoop, trying to make things happen. A couple of those kind of looked like some wild takes to the basket. But DJ Carton scored 11 of 13 Ohio State points in a 3-minute stretch, which included 3 dunks in a stretch there, and he was definitely the most impressive, up-and-comer for Ohio State.
Right, and I think we all expected that, right? Came out as a 5-star recruit. Really interested to see when I get to attend a game exactly that athleticism and that ability. I just really quick to touch on Brandon again. I know this is a Cedarville player, so I'm sorry I'm bringing him up, but I did grow up next door to the guy. Him dunking on Caleb Wesson. He used to do that to me for sure when we'd play in his driveway when we were kids.
That's funny.
Yeah, no, it was just really cool to see that, and it made me sad I didn't attend the game because I didn't even realize I had forgotten he went there. He's a couple years younger than me.
So by the transitive property, Andy's comparing himself to Caleb Wesson. Is that what I'm getting from this?
Well, I mean, Brandon dunked on Caleb Wesson, so I mean, at
had
least,
to be a cool moment.
Just
for
by
him.
the fact that I was a couple years older, I think I might have won a pickup game or 2 against B when we were growing up.
And how many did you lose?
Too many his younger brother's really talented too, Javon. That whole family's just great at basketball. So
I'll have to
yeah,
check in on him,
Yeah.
see how they're doing.
Anyway,
Yeah,
back to Ohio State.
I was excited about what I saw. So Diallo came in, and everyone said, he's kind of raw. He started playing basketball late. The biggest 6'11er, the 6'11 center for Ohio State. He didn't get in the first half. He came in the second half. His first shot attempt he tried to dunk it, stuffed by the rim. So that looked a little bit awkward, like how people might have been anticipating. But towards the end, he had like 7 points in a mop-up time towards the end. He got a dunk. He hit some free throws. So that wasn't bad. Gaffney, I think they all had a dunk. Maybe Liddell didn't, but they all, the other 3 got a dunk, so that was kind of nice to get them, a little bit of an emphatic, announcement of their presence here in Columbus. Gaffney didn't, Holtman said that he was anticipating some awkward offensive moments from Gaffney because he's never been like a go-to scorer or anything, even in high school. I definitely got that sense in the game. They weren't looking for him to post up. They weren't giving him like any high post looks. He wasn't squaring up with the ball either. I anticipate him more so getting looks off of like offensive rebounds and stuff like that, putbacks. But Liddell showed some nice versatility. I mean, I kind of assumed that he was more of kind of like a a physical presence down low with some athleticism. But he hit both of the more outside looks he had. He hit a turnaround jumper and another free throw line jumper. So he looked pretty nice as well. I think he had 9 points, which was second most out of the freshmen in 15 minutes.
Okay.
No, yeah. Overall, though, so just overall previewing kind of the season for Ohio State, though, I think what does this mean going forward, kind of a thing, right? Is that a lot of the improvements that needed to happen with this team to actually be competitive, they're so young, but they have a lot of talent that if they can put it together, they can actually, I think, be competitive in the Big Ten. The fact that Carton is showing up this early, Diallo's progressing a lot faster than I expected because him as a prospect was considered very raw. And Caleb Wesson developing a three-point jumper could be lethal. I think if he can actually be a proficient three-point shooter, because last year he incorporated it a little bit, but it wasn't quite there. If he can actually be an efficient three-point shooter for this team, and then you have that outside threat combined with his inside presence, and he's gotten leaner to be more versatile on the inside, this team could actually make some sort of a run in the Big Ten.
Yeah. I don't know if they're going to be the best team in the Big Ten just because Michigan State is looking very good as they always do, but it's possible to say they could be better than Maryland or Purdue if they play consistently well.
Yeah, and let me just say, Holman has been kind of tight-lipped on giving out like compliments in the preseason. He keeps harkening back to saying that they're not as good as they were last season at this point. He hasn't been quick to give all that much praise to the freshmen. He said he liked how they've been playing, but said they've got a lot of room for improvement. But he did say yesterday, he said Caleb Wesson's become such a good shooter, and I was like, damn, that's kind of a more flowery compliment that he's given recently. And Caleb Wesson last year, I don't think anyone was fearing Caleb Wesson. He might have tried it a few times. I don't think anyone was really fearing Caleb Wesson popping out and hitting a three. You know what I mean? But this season, it looked like that's a legitimate threat to his offensive game coming into this season, from what I saw last night.
All right. Well, I'm excited to see how the basketball team plays as their regular season begins next week, I believe. So, but
Cincinnati, 8:30, November 6th.
All right, let's get it going. But there are a couple more things more on the football-related scheme that I do want to highlight and touch on here. First, just going on national news, a couple days ago, the NCAA announced that they were going to be, starting the process to, allow players and college athletes to make money off of their own likeness, and that is a far cry from a month before when California started passing their bill for the state, and the NCAA is like, hey, you can't do that. We're not doing that. So kind of a dramatic shift, but
Force their hand,
really, and it's a pretty good news for fans of the NCAA football games.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah, I knew you'd bring that up first.
Yes, absolutely.
And you should.
Yeah, of course I should.
That's the biggest part of this news.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing is the jargon they use is a little bit tricky because it isn't just – because at first it kind of seemed like, oh, they just approved that suddenly players can get paid in the same manner that we were talking about in California. But they didn't necessarily come out and say that. What they really came out and said was the Board of Governors has voted on having a consensus that they will now direct the other divisions of the NCAA to tell the schools to start looking at modernizing their rules in that category and giving the opportunity for more an enhanced benefit for players in terms of their name, image, and likeness.
It's a direction for a draft, for an outline, for a plan.
Yes.
For players to make money off their name, image, and likeness.
It's a positive in the sense that it does get the ball rolling, even though with some of their verbiage there in the fine print, it's not quite as big change as some people might have thought.
The first graph was a little more directive than I think that because it was essentially saying that players will be able to make money off their name, image, and likeness by January 2021. That was a directive given.
Which,
however, they have deferred the exact policies, the regulations, the rules to the individual divisions to figure out. So it's not an instant change.
And there are also guidelines that they've been giving them to make sure that it's not kind of just like a free for all. Because I know Gene Smith was talking about how one of his biggest concerns surround like it not being able to be regulated very well, and I think that's still a concern from those boards, and I think that they're still going to be collecting information until April is what the NCAA release said, so that they can continue to modify. And think about what the best way to approach regulations for these type of policies are going to be.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So just wanted to touch on that because that is going to be very impactful in the coming years for incoming Ohio State recruits.
It's overdue.
Yeah, it's definitely overdue. I think this should have happened
a basic
years
economic
ago.
freedom.
Yes, but
part of me feels bad for some of the players that are like, seniors and stuff now. And they're getting asked about this stuff, and of course they want it to be, they want player. Cause they're players, they want players to be able to do that. But I kind of feel bad for some of the players. It's like, that could have made some money and that are now gonna just miss that cut. That kind of makes me feel bad. But
or like you look at some of the players who just graduated and just went to the NFL, and now obviously they're getting paid pro contracts, but you just think of what they could have had in college. You look at people like Terry McLaurin, even going back a couple of years to Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
This just seems like a no-nonsense solution to the pay. Do players get paid issue? Because it removes a couple of the issues that were systemic for, if you were to give players a salary. Well, is it flat for every school? Is it does this sport that makes more money get paid more than this sport? Now it's just essentially you're giving players the basic economic freedom to go out there and take an endorsement deal or to sign autographs and charge money for it on a weekend. Any player from any NCAA sport can do it, and it's fair to everyone. If you're a bigger name, you're going to get more for an endorsement or for autograph signings or what have you. But it's fair in the sense that, no everyone will be under the same guidelines. It will have the same maximum potential to make money on the side. And for how much money they make the university in turn, it's just a way to get them more of the market share. You talk about that in economics. You deserve a certain percentage of the cut if you're making so much money for someone else. People are like, oh, but they're compensated in scholarships. Well, that doesn't even come close to the amount that they give the university just in direct pay. So I think this is a way to even out and allow, they're making the NCAA and the universities making money off of these things. You should be able to too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And Chris Holtman kind of said it best. He said, I think a lot of people just thought it was, it was a long time coming, or it was inevitable in a sense. And you're seeing that change starting to get implemented. And I think it's nice to see,
It's definitely nice to see, oftentimes, we in this podcast and just in general, we're reporting and we're covering the team and everything. But you also have to remember that these are actual real human beings. They're genuine people who have their own backstories. Some of them, may not come from the best background. Not everyone can be, as privileged necessarily.
Right.
And that's a whole other thing. I'm not generalizing. I'm just saying there are people come from different financial backgrounds.
Yeah.
And, and money like this can definitely help people a lot. Even then, money, it helps.
Right.
So this is big.
I think no, it's huge. It's a big step forward. Dang, I had another point. I kind of lost it. But yeah. Oh yeah, I was gonna say. So when do you think we'll get NCAA football back?
When do I think? Yeah, onto the real important stuff.
The hard-hitting J.
The hard-hitting issues.
Well, just going on how the statement said that. And just in general, I think maybe stuff won't be implemented until 2021. I don't know if it's going to be immediate for 2020. So maybe 2021 will be the first time we see it coming.
I don't think they could even get the game devved by for NCAA 20. I think NCAA 21 would be the earliest.
You also have to keep in mind the new consoles are coming out, so that's going to impact it too.
Right.
But that's completely unrelated to the actual stuff of this podcast. We can talk about that later.
I think it's fun.
Viewers, if you want to hear us talk more about video games, please comment below. We'll gladly do so.
Tune into Aaron Lien's The Lantern author page.
Yeah, exactly. Esports, it's big.
Esports.
All right. But I do think that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you're still with us, we do not have a game to cover this weekend, but we'll be back next week for our coverage from Maryland. Well, another episode of the Best Damn Pod in the land, maybe talking more about Ohio State men's basketball as their regular season starts. And, we'll have preview shows and whatnot. But from Griffin Strom and Andy Enders, I'm Brian Nelson, and this has been the Best Damn Pod in the land. Thank you very much for watching.
Bang.
Peace.
Peace.